me in studio once again is our UK correspondent, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Jonathan, what a year it has been. First of all, to that question, which has not been definitively answered. Will Brexit happen? Could it still be reversed? And if so, as Donald Tusk himself is saying, how big is that door open? How wide is that door open, perhaps, to reverse it?
Well, today marks, as you said, 1 year exactly since 17.4 million British people said they want Britain to leave the EU. So it seems very unlikely that any politician in the UK is now going to go back on that referendum result. They were offered the opportunity to say whether or not they wanted to stay, and the British people said in this small but meaningful majority that they'd had enough of the technocracy of Europe, that they wanted to reclaim the sovereignty of Great Britain, that they wanted their own elected politicians and judges to make the rules and deal with the law in the UK, and all of those reasons and others were among the ones given by those people who said they wished for the UK to leave.
So perhaps it will happen. Do you think the timeline will still hold up?
Well, so the timeline, again, is fairly fixed. We have now the negotiations going on, which started officially just a few days ago. What we know about that is that there's a 2-year time limit from the triggering of Article 50. That means that when it was triggered by Theresa May, that meant the clock started ticking. 2 years has to come and go, and then Britain will leave the EU unless there's a highly exceptional case where all of the member states agree to extend the negotiations. Not impossible, but it seems very unlikely. Instead, it seems that in that time, this enormous amount of negotiation will need to be got through.
There's so much detail, though, Jonathan. I mean, I know we just talked the other day. I mean, these working groups have just now started getting together. They haven't even created a working group to deal with the future of trade. I mean, eventually they're going to have to sign agreements. Is that going to happen?
Well, it's going to be a very tough couple of years for the British and also for Europe, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. And many are saying that this is an optimistic moment, though it doesn't seem like it all the time with the uncertainty of the government and the like, because Britain is, in a way, reclaiming an independence that it had partially lost through its membership of the EU. What that means is that those trade deals will be made. For example, as well, we've seen other issues like the one of EU nationals living in the UK dealt with last night by Theresa May. I say dealt with, she's started. She's indicated now that EU citizens living in the UK will be allowed to stay.
She's given kind of opaque, vague clarification on that.
It will be clarified more, they say, on Monday, an official says, when they actually publish some guidelines. But she's been relatively clear that if it's reciprocal, she will be allowing EU citizens to remain in the UK. If they've been there for 5 years or more, they'll be able to gain the rights almost identical, I think identical to a citizen. There'll be issues about whether or not their children will be allowed to stay, exactly about when the cut-off date is for that 5 years and the like. But in general, this is what everybody expected her to do, and the EU seems to be reacting well so far.
Let's take a step back just to a macro level here. Since over the last year, with the election of Emmanuel Macron, a very pro-EU candidate, and still strong support for Merkel, is the future of the EU, is it still strong?
Well, we have to look also further afield from Europe itself. We have currently an American president and administration which was quite unashamedly in favour of Brexit. So Britain will be hoping that it can develop a strong future in terms of trade and relations with nations outside of Europe. But at the same time, the EU wishes to remain strong, and the UK says it wishes for there to remain a strong EU so that they can have very close ties with the EU, very close dealings, but just from outside, not as a member state. I think it's in all these countries' interests for the EU to be strengthened, but from the UK's point of view, it shouldn't be strengthened at the UK's expense, and that will be the nub of how these negotiations go.
Give us a quick answer, 30 seconds or less here. The single biggest thing that surprised you a year ago on how this went down, was it that the referendum itself even happened? Was it that there wasn't a 2/3 majority? It was a simple majority? What's the single biggest thing that you couldn't believe when this was going on?
Well, I hesitate to blow my own trumpet, but I always said that the vote would go that way and that Britain would choose to leave. And I think the surprising thing has been what's happened to the British government in the meantime. This weakened Theresa May, this weakened majority. People thought she'd walk it and would be in a strong position to negotiate. And that does mean that there's now a lot of uncertainty ahead.
Jonathan Sacerdoti, a man who doesn't often blow his own horn, but when it's warranted, here it is. He called it. All right, Jonathan, thank you for your analysis in studio. And still to come, Texas. It's known for cowboys and cows, of course. And yet a popular burger chain is about to introduce a meatless burger made by California scientists.